Okay, so Thunderbolt, XDR display, and the M1 chip are already making the M1 iPad Pro like a dream machine. But here are 5 things that iOS 15 can bring to the table at WWDC that will make this the absolute go-to for any creator on the go. This list ranges from things that are pretty much a guarantee to things that are absolute pipe dreams. So before we get into it, be sure to hit the subscribe button and click the bell so you don't miss as we cover your favorite tech and video games. I'm Chris Grant Jr. It's the Granite Geek Show. Alright, so kicking it off with number 1, this is going to be 4-way split screen or movable windows on the iOS home screen. So this is something that we've wanted for a long time, and Apple has seemed reluctant to give us any kind of real multitasking. The split screen is obviously great, and it's a step in the right direction, and then they have this flyover card, which is basically just like an iPhone app on top of a split screen. So you could really run up to 3 apps at a time, but especially with the 12.9-inch, almost 13-inch screen, we should be able to have it split 4 ways and have our apps running on 4 different apps. Now, as opposed to having resizable movable windows on the home screen, the 4-way split seems more Apple-like, as they don't want to have the home screen there in the background, as that does get into RAM issues and RAM management. It might seem weird, but even running your desktop in the background does take up some CPU and RAM usage on average computers, so they're able to increase performance with the iPad by only having apps running on the screen at any given time. So even though resizable windows would be nice, and I'm going to talk about that a little later, I think a 4-way split screen would be a nice compromise that would still allow people to multitask while still keeping performance up to snuff. Now, speaking of the display itself, that brings us to number 2, which is full dual monitor support. And I know they've been saying with the M1 that we will have external monitor support all the way up to the Pro XDR display, and certain apps can plug into that to off-put like a main display if you're editing video or things like that onto the bigger screen. But what I would like is for the iPad to truly recognize 2 displays, its own and an external, and that would give even more flexibility in iOS to open up maybe movable windows or things like that, to have maybe 4 apps running at the same time with 2 instances of split screen, or up to 6 if you want to do the flyover card as well. I think the M1 iPad has more than enough RAM and power to do that. I mean, it's in the Max, for crying out loud, so it definitely can handle it. I think plugging in an external display into your M1 iPad should unlock features like that. Now, number 3 is going to be support for more video codecs, and this will help out with pro apps. We'll get to that a little bit later. But yeah, I have multiple different cameras that shoot in different video formats, and they're not all supported right now on iOS, which means that there are some cameras I just can't use to edit with. Yeah, that's no good, especially knowing that the M1 iPad is more than capable of running all of these video codecs. Apple just needs to unlock it here and allow iOS to support all the video formats that macOS does, because the M1 chip can run it. And I'm okay with it being exclusive to the M1 iPads because they are running those things. Heck, that would help to separate the M1 iPad from all the other iPads. It's using that extra power, using that extra beef in the processor and even the RAM in order to run Mac applications and do things like a Mac does. So number 4, you probably guessed it, it is full desktop applications. No, not porting macOS to the iPad, as every time I say this it seems to get confused or lost in translation. I mean taking apps that run on macOS and bringing them to the iPad. This is more possible now than it's ever been with Apple running M1 on the iPad. Many apps that are already running on macOS can run on the iPad. The only question will be, and I've said this before, how will you translate that interface for touch? Now, of course, the iPad Pro also has support for a monitor, keyboard, and mouse, so you can use peripherals and use it like a desktop application. But I would imagine that Apple would keep a standard that any app that would be ported from macOS to iOS would have to support touch natively. But it already seems that stuff like this is on the way and being worked on. Remember, a lot of the people who work for these companies like Blackmagic and Adobe, and even Apple with Final Cut and Logic, they're nerds just like us, and they would love to see apps like these run on iOS devices. And no, I don't believe it would cannibalize sales of laptops like the MacBook Air and the MacBook, because once again, some people just don't like the tablet form factor, or they have no need or desire for touch on any Apple device they use, maybe other than the iPhone. There will always be a place for laptops and desktops, and I've said this before, people thought the laptop would cannibalize the desktop. Why would you sit at home at a desk when you could be on the go getting your work done? That's never stopped anyone before, and bringing more power to tablets is just going to give the customer more options. All of these apps, Premiere, DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut Pro, Logic, even apps like Xcode, all these apps running on iPad OS are now not just a dream, they are within reach, although some apps like Xcode may be a couple years, many years down the road. But speaking of dreams, I want to get to the fifth and final thing that I'd love to see in iOS. It is eGPU support on iPad OS. So with the transition to Apple Silicon, they've taken this away from the Macs. iOS devices have never had it, but there's still something to be said for external graphics and the power that they can bring. Now with M1, the graphics are great and hold up pretty well against a lot of different workflows, but I personally loved being able to buy a Mac, sometimes on the cheaper end of the spectrum, and then plug in a powerful eGPU and just have a powerhouse of a machine. The entry level for creating professional work then became as cheap as the cheapest Thunderbolt 3 supporting Mac. I really am going to miss that kind of flexibility, and I really don't see it happening. I did a video on eGPUs and whether they would be coming to M1 or any kind of Apple Silicon anytime soon, and it doesn't seem like it's going to happen as of right now, but we'll keep an eye on it. But yeah, that's a dream. And with that, those are my 5 things that I think iOS 15 could do that would completely just set it apart and make it the go-to machine for creators, period. And let me clarify, if all 5 of those things happened, it would be the go-to for everyone. But of course, let me know what you think down in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you would like to see in iOS 15. I'll be covering it, obviously, as WWDC is just around a month away, so you don't want to miss. Hit the subscribe button and click the bell so you can be up to date when I drop those videos. I'll also be doing full iPad M1 reviews on the device itself, as well as cases, stands, keyboards, finding out what the best kind of workflow you can set up for your new iPad, or even if you got the 3rd and 4th generation, those videos will be helpful for that too. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Chris Grant Jr. It's the Granite Geek Show.